Hello there, Year 10. Today we're going to be looking at what is the UK's role in the world. So we're going to be thinking about whether the UK is still globally significant. We're going to look at a global conflict and the role that the UK played in resolving the conflict. As I go through the key content on each slide, you need to be completing the relevant task. You can either do this on the worksheet, also uploaded on MS Teams, or you can make relevant notes. So firstly, we need to know what three international organisations the UK is part of and that we're going to be looking at today. So these are NATO, the United Nations and G7. As I go through them on the next few slides, you should be completing the first task on your worksheet. So a table with the key information about each of the organisations. To start with then, NATO. NATO is a group of 28 countries who work together to ensure their own security. They aim to prevent conflict by promoting cooperation and to resolve conflicts by political means and military means as a last resort. Importantly, Ukraine is not part of NATO, even though it has requested to be. Russia isn't either. Next is the United Nations. The United Nations is made up of 193 member states and was founded in 1945 at the end of World War II to maintain peace. The UN tries to solve issues that can't be dealt with by individual countries. And finally, the G7 has 7 members and they meet once a year to discuss relevant issues to them. So these might be economic issues, but they could also be social issues or political issues. What happened in Ukraine? Okay, at the beginning I said we're going to look at the Ukraine crisis. For us to see how the UK got involved, we need to know what the problem was, what was happening that meant the UK got involved. Now it all revolves around Crimea. Okay, you can see Crimea on this map here. It's part of Ukraine prior to the crisis, but Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, making it part of Russia. So it essentially took Crimea from Ukraine. So here, as I go through each of the relevant dates of the conflict, you need to be annotating the timeline. Okay, so the timeline shown here is also on the worksheet. Okay, so in 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became quite divided over their relationship with Russia. The east of Ukraine, closest to Russia, wanted to maintain strong ties, whereas the west of Ukraine, furthest away from Russia, wanted to make closer ties with the European Union. In 2013, backed by Russia, the Ukrainian government decided not to form closer trade links with the EU, but to strengthen ties with Russia instead. This decision was unpopular with many Ukrainians who wanted to build a close relationship with Western Europe, and protests broke out. Between the 27th and 28th of February 2014, Russian gunmen seized key buildings in the Crimean capital. Remember, Crimea is the area I was just talking about on the previous slide that Ukraine previously had control over. On the 16th of March, the Russian President Vladimir Putin took control of Crimea and moved a large number of Russian troops to the Russian-Ukraine border. This was not seen as legal by the USA, UK and EU. On the 17th of April, talks were held between the UK, USA, Russia and the EU to try to de-escalate the conflict. However, this was not successful, and between May and November 2014, the Ukrainian people elected a pro-European president and pro-European parties in their parliamentary elections. The conflict in Ukraine spread through much of the east of the country, with the Ukrainian army fighting against pro-Russian separatists. So the Ukrainian army are fighting with people that want to maintain those close links with Russia. This has resulted in continued tensions within the region. On the 17th of July 2014, the Malaysian Airlines flight was shot down. A conclusion of this was that it was downed by a surface-to-air missile launched from pro-Russian separatist-controlled territory in Ukraine. In September 2014, the first ceasefire was signed, which was meant to establish a ceasefire. However, it failed and was followed by 20 more ceasefires that kept failing due to renewed conflict. On the 1st of October 2019, parties finally agreed to roadmap an end to the conflict. So you can see this is 6 years that it's taken. So what role did the UK play? As I go through how each of the international organisations you learnt about at the beginning, what they've done and how they responded, you need to complete your table with what they did. Quite easy, I'll be telling you. But then how do you think this has had an impact? Do you think it's had an impact in the short term, or is it more of a long-term solution? Is it for one party, or is it for multiple groups? So as part of NATO, they have tried to settle the conflict by encouraging negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians. They contributed 5,000 soldiers in 2015 as part of a rapid response unit to deter Russia from trying to gain any more territory. This actually looked like Air Force monitoring and training in the Baltics and singular ships in the Black Sea. So although it sounds like quite a lot, perhaps its impact was rather limited. They said this was because they did not want to appear aggressive and therefore heighten the conflict any further. The United Nations then, they're trying to end the fighting in Ukraine by trying to support peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. For the people of Ukraine, the UN are providing aid by contributing £15 million to the aid budget for short-term things such as food, medicine and blankets. The G7, which used to be the G8 before the conflict, removed Russia in 2014, so they became the G7. They did this after Russia seized Crimea, and the G7 have since imposed sanctions on Russia, restricting the money Russian banks can borrow and limiting G7 trade with Russia. So there's more of an economic sanction. They're trying to stop Russia being able to further its economy. So we've gone through the basic information here. If you want to read through the CGP guide, you can look on page 81 and that will tell you basically what I've just told you about the situation. I have also put at the end of your worksheet a page of text. This is from the Prisoners of Geography book, which talks about the Ukraine-Russia crisis. It will give you a little bit more understanding. Now that you've completed your worksheet, I would like you to have a go at an 8-mark question on the Ukraine crisis. On MS Teams, I have put the forms link. Please complete your answer on this forms link so that your geography teacher can give you feedback. If you're not sure on where to start, please use the sentence starters on the worksheet and on the forms link to help you.